All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over the ACT English section. This is your first section on the ACT. So after you get to your testing room at 8 a.m. and you go through all the preliminary information and Scantron bubbling, this is the section you're going to start out with. So let's first go over breakdown for the ACT English section. It's 75 questions in 45 minutes, which I know it seems like a lot more questions than minutes, but these questions typically go by pretty fast, so timing shouldn't be that much of an issue. It's 5 prose passages that are 15 questions each. That 5 times 15 gives you 75 questions. And basically the questions in the ACT English section are mainly you have portions of the passage that are underlined, and you have to see whether whatever's underlined, if it's good or if it needs to be changed by an answer choice. You can also get big picture questions in the ACT English section, so reordering paragraphs, figuring if information should be added to particular paragraphs, or even seeing if the passage fits a particular purpose. All those can be big picture questions as well, in addition to these specific underlined questions. There's a random order of difficulty for the questions. Typically, you want to focus more on the questions that are, dealing with the underlined portions before you deal with the big picture, obviously. And it covers punctuation, grammar, sentence structure, writing strategy, writing organization, and writing style. So everything related to grammar and writing. So we're going to go over grammar review for the ACT English section. It is a lot to go over, so I apologize if the video is long, but it's basically comprehensive, everything you need to know for the ACT English section. So let's start with sentence basics. So it's important to know the difference between a sentence and a sentence fragment. So what does a sentence have? It's having a subject and a predicate or a verb, while a sentence fragment is only having one or the other. So, for instance, a sentence fragment would be like, in my opinion, the movie theater. Okay, we know movie theater is the subject, but we don't have a verb. So we can fix it by saying, let's go to the movie theater. We're adding a verb, and we have our subject. Another sentence fragment, will talk to me. Okay, talk is your verb, but who is talking to you? So John, for example, that would be your subject, and this would be a complete sentence. So that's what it basically boils down to. The number agreement. Basically what this means is if you have singular words, it's staying with singular words, plural words are with plural words. You want to put the subject next to the verb to figure out whether they agree in terms of being singular or plural. You can sometimes have prepositional phrases, which are kind of like you have the subject and then you have a comma and then you have a lot of information and then you have another comma and then the verb. So they separate the subjects from the verb, but you just need to compare the subjects and the verbs to figure out if they agree correctly. And then it's important to note that collective nouns or pronouns should be singular. So like the team, that's a singular, not plural, even though there's multiple people in the team. So for examples, the computer, which was bought last week, are now broken. So the computer is our subject and are is our verb. Obviously that doesn't agree. So we change are to is. The computer is now broken. The computer are now broken. When you're doing number agreement questions, you can kind of ignore this prepositional information and just focus on the subject and the verb. Another example, the team are very happy they won today. Okay, team and are, what we were talking about with collective nouns, it needs to be singular. So it'd be the team is very happy they won today. All right, then we go on to punctuation. There's different types of punctuation that can be tested on the ACT English exam. These include commas, periods, exclamation points, question marks, semicolons, colons, and dashes. So let's start with commas. You should ideally put commas where there should be a small pause. It should be natural, so you don't want to break up long items with commas unless you absolutely need to. So if it's a long phrase that normally doesn't need a small pause, you obviously don't want to put a comma there. Commas can separate two independent clauses with fanboys, which are coordinating conjunctions, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So it can separate the clauses, and then you can have your coordinating conjunction, and then the second independent clause. And you want to separate extra phrases with commas, kind of what we were talking about earlier, where we have the subject, we have a comma, we have descriptive information, and then another comma, and then the verb. The stuff in between the commas are the extra phrases. So examples. Let's say we have tomorrow will be a snow day, so we will not have to do homework this evening. So we have a coordinated conjunction here, so, and tomorrow will be a snow day. That's an independent clause. We will not have to do homework this evening. That's also an independent clause. So we want to use a comma here to separate the two clauses. Another example, if you're about to sneeze, you should cover your nose and mouth. This is a dependent clause, but remember, a dependent clause can be connected to an independent clause by a comma. Remember, just dependent clauses, they can't stand by themselves. It needs to be connected to something, while independent clauses can stand on their own. So that's why between sneeze and you, there should be a comma. All right, end punctuation now. These are periods, exclamation points, and question marks. You're using this as a way to end independent clauses. And the emphasis or purpose is what helps you determine which one to use. So if you don't want much emphasis on a sentence, you can just use a period. If you want emphasis, you use an exclamation point. And if you want to say it as if it's a question, obviously you'd use a question mark. These are only used to end independent clauses alone, though. So an example, for a period, if I just want to say, I want to go to the mall, right? There's no emphasis. It's just a complete sentence on its own. Then if we do an exclamation point, I want to go to the mall. See, we have more emphasis here because of the exclamation point. And then the question mark, can I go to the mall? Right? It's apprehensive. We don't know if it's going to happen because we're asking the question. So typically you want to have context when you're trying to figure out end punctuation, trying to see if it's warranted to have a period, exclamation point, or question mark, depending on what are the sentences before and after these end punctuation, like the sentences that involve you needing to do a particular type of end punctuation. All right, so now semicolons, you can use it to join two complete related sentences in the place of a conjunction. The related part is important, and in place of a conjunction is important, because you don't want to use it for clauses that aren't connected to each other in a way, and when the two clauses are not independent. For dependent clauses and an independent connecting those two, you still need a comma instead of a semicolon. So here's an example, a couple examples. The big winter storm was on its way, however, we expected to leave before it hit. So the big winter storm was on its way, that's an independent clause. However, we expected to leave before it hit. That's also an independent clause. So we can connect it using a semicolon, since we do not have a coordinating conjunction to connect the two independent clauses. Another example, a new light bulb, the lamp is not working. Okay, a new light bulb, that's dependent. Lamp is not working is independent, but you would not use a semicolon here. So you'd say, like, for example, a new light bulb is needed since the lamp is not working, for example. All right, then colons. You want to use these after a complete sentence, but before a list or clarification. So whenever you have a list of things that are about to be said, like with commas in between them, typically you want to hint towards a colon, but make sure that what comes before the colon is a complete sentence. So for example, we have, I'm looking forward to doing the following over winter break: sleeping, playing video games, and hanging out with friends. So I see, okay, sleeping, comma, playing video games, comma, and hanging out with friends. These are all like list items because they're separated by commas. So I'm thinking, okay, I want to use a colon here, but we just want to make sure that this first part is an independent clause. So I'm looking forward to doing the following over winter break. That is an independent clause. So this does work. Another example, the book was a great read, colon, let's go to the mall. Okay, these two independent clauses are not at all connected to each other. So you cannot use a colon here. You need to use, if you're using a colon, you need to have the other piece of information get connected, or you'd have to put periods between them if you want to keep the clauses the same. All right, and then dashes. It's like an interruption or a sudden change in thought or more emphasis in a sentence. It's not really used often compared to the other forms of punctuation we just talked about, but it adds a little bit of variety to your writing style, which is never bad. So, for example, the alarm clock failed to ring. I was late for my class again. Okay, so this is a run-on sentence, right? Because technically we have two independent clauses here. So typically when you're doing the ACT English exam, the ACT is not going to give you answer choices that could both be correct. So obviously you could use a period here, but you could also use a dash here. So it's going to be one or the other. Typically the other punctuation options will 100% be incorrect. So don't worry about, oh, what if I have two correct punctuations on the exam? That's not going to happen. There's only one correct answer. Another example, the young infant coughing all through the night must not have felt too well. So you could do commas here for all through the night. This is extra information that we could separate, or you could use dashes. Either one works. I'm using dashes in this case because that's what we're talking about right now. But again, the punctuation for answer choices you get on the ACT English exam, it's only going to be one correct answer. So you won't see a comma for this and a dash. All right, possession and apostrophes. So apostrophes, they show ownership. So if the thing that owns something else is singular, you want to put an apostrophe before the S. If it's plural, you're putting the apostrophe after the S. And you don't want to use it with possessive forms of pronouns like there, like THEIR. We're going to go over an example if it is a little confusing. So one dog's dish is full. So dog, that's our subject, right? And he has a dish. So since dog is singular, we have an apostrophe and then S. For plural, the 3 players jersey sold for a great sum at an auction. 3 players, it's plural, so we want to put the apostrophe after the S for the subject. And then, for example, for possessive pronouns, like I said, their rooms are dirty. You don't need an apostrophe here. But if you're saying they're coming my way, so they are, then you can use an apostrophe. Typically, is or are, that's when you would be using an apostrophe when you're combining 2 words together. All right. You need to know different tenses, verb tenses for the exam. So the typical ones that you're going to be tested on, the past tense, so like was or were, the present, is or are, the future, will, past perfect, had been, present perfect, have been, future perfect, will have been. So when you're doing tense questions in the ACT English section, kind of understand how context is working in terms of what are the tenses in the previous sentences and what's coming after. So that way you'll be able to figure out this is the tense, and I can make sure that the answer choice that I pick accurately keeps the tense the same, because that's what we want. Otherwise, if we have different tenses, it's not going to make that much sense. So like an example, after he have completed the dishes, he started clean the stove. Okay, that makes no sense. And we have 2 problems in terms of tense here. So after he had completed the dishes, he started cleaning the stove. So had is in the past, cleaning is in the present, which makes sense here because we have this word after, which changes it from past to present. So sometimes also make sure to look out for transition words. That's important. Another example, the passengers swarmed to shore after their boat had sank in the icy waters. It actually swam to shore, which also doesn't make sense. So we want to make sure that we keep the tense the same. So the passengers swam to shore after their boat had sunk in the icy waters. So they're both past tense here. All right, parallelism. This is basically about the structure of wording. It should be similar in a passage, kind of echoing based back with tense, where you want to have the same tense. So if you're using past tense, you need to keep that, unless you're changing tense in like a later paragraph or something, but it shouldn't be in the same paragraph. That doesn't make sense. Okay, so parallelism helps out with the flow of the passage. So when you're having the same tense, it helps it all make sense, because obviously with different tenses, the flow is going to be choppy and it's not going to make as much sense. So for example, the baby enjoys playing, walking, and to talk. Okay, so playing, walking, to talk. Okay, we see here it's not the same tense as the others, so we'd say the baby enjoys playing, walking, and talking. See how it flows better, and it's correct grammatically. Another example, my dogs have the following 3 names: John, another name David, and Richard. So you don't need to say this another named part, because you're already covering it by saying the 3 names. So you can just list it out in list order: John, David, and Richard, like that. So parallelism is really important because it really helps with flow, and again, it makes sense grammatically wise. All right, then transitions. There are words that make connections between phrases, sentences, and paragraphs, right? They boil down to 3 main types, like but transitions, also transitions, and because transitions. You'll obviously not see just those 3. You're going to see a lot more than that. But that's basically what it boils down to. Is the transition we're looking for because the second clause is different from the first clause? Is it because it's supporting the second clause? Is the second clause supporting the first clause? Or is the second clause like an effect of the first clause? So that's what you should kind of be thinking about in your head for transitions. And then obviously you should be able to substitute the transitions in the answer choices and be able to have the passage still flow correctly. You want to look at what comes before and after the transition to determine the correct one again. Knowing what type of transition it is out of the 3, and kind of understanding like what should the transition do. Like, is it because the clauses are different? Is it because the second clause is an effect of the first clause? Or is it because they're connected in some way? So for an example, in addition to Americans, Europeans have more vacation time. Okay, so we have in addition to and more vacation time. Okay, that doesn't make sense grammatically why. So we'd say as opposed to Americans, Europeans have more vacation time, right? We're saying this opposed to, we're showing that this first clause is different from the second clause. Another example, we lost the game by a huge margin. In contrast, our coach made us run laps. Okay, we lost the game and our coach is making us run laps. It's probably because it's it's a because transition. It's like, well, it's connecting the two together. It's not an opposite one like up here. So we lost the game by a huge margin. Consequently, our coach made us run laps. So that'd be correct grammatically wise there. Obviously, you'll have answer choices, but you should be able to tell which transition reflects which type of the three transitions, but also because, and you'll be able to get your correct answer. All right, wordiness is another thing. Biggest tip for the ACT English section, you need to be concise as possible. The longest answer is almost never correct, unless the longer answer is having important information that you're not getting from the smaller answer. This is very important. You want to be descriptive without using a lot of words. So you don't want to repeat similar ideas with more words, and you don't want irrelevant words that make absolutely no sense compared to what the sentence is trying to accomplish. So, for an example, why is the science class so challenging, hard, and difficult? Okay, challenging, hard, difficult, they are all the same meaning-wise, right? So you can just get rid of the hard and difficult part and just say, why is the science class so challenging? Another example, it bothers me when meetings last for more than a duration of 2 hours. Okay, you don't need this more than a duration part. This is extra information you don't need. So you can say, it bothers me when meetings last for more than 2 hours. It's concise, it's getting to the point, and it's accomplishing the same thing as the sentence up here, but it's more easier to read and it makes more sense. All right, word order is another important thing. You want to have sentences or things stated as clearly as possible so that way the reader understands what the writer is trying to say. So for example, to Texas on my vacation, I am going. Okay, if you are reading this, you have no idea what's going on because it just makes no sense. It's in complete disarray. So you could rephrase this to say, I'm going to Texas for my vacation. Okay, that makes more sense. Another example, the class was missed by me because my alarm clock did not go off, which had not been set correctly. Again, it's completely out of order. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So you could say the alarm clock, which had not been set correctly, did not go off, causing me to miss my class. This is if you want to keep the same information. You could honestly get rid of this which not have been set correctly because it is extra information. But regardless, if you're wanting to keep the same information, you can just reorder the phrases so that way it makes more sense compared to what the writer wants the reader to get out of for the meaning. All right, illogical comparisons. When you're doing comparisons between two things, your intended meaning and your actual meaning should be the same. They should make sense. You're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges, for example. So for an example, the captain of the baseball team was better than the opposing team. So when you say it like this, you're almost saying like the captain was better than everyone on the opposing team, which is probably not what the writer's trying to say. So you can reorder it to say the captain of the baseball team was better than that of the opposing team. That's making it more clear we're comparing captain to captain, not captain to the entire team. Another example, John was smarter than anyone in his family. So saying anyone in his family also includes himself. So is John smarter than John? Not in this case. So we're saying John was smarter than anyone else in his family. So that way we're comparing John to everyone else, which makes sense since we're using smarter. All right, and then proper wording. So I versus me and who versus whom. These are very important. So you're using me for an object, right? I for a subject, whom for an object, and who for a subject. So we're going to go over that in the next slide. So for example, whenever we go to the restaurant, me am the first to order. So we're using I versus me, and we're in a subject situation. So we don't want to use me, we want to use I. And sometimes if you're a little bit confused about, you know, whether we're using it as a subject or an object, just read the flow of the sentence, right? Me am the first to order. That makes no sense. So I am the first to order. That would be correct. Another example, the present Jake received is from I. So in this case, you're doing it in the form of an object. The present Jake received is from me because Jake is the subject here. So the present Jake received is from me, not I. Again, this doesn't make much sense. Is from me does. All right, adjectives versus adverbs. So adjectives, they're describing nouns specifically. Adverbs, you're trying to describe verbs. Adjectives, you can even describe other adverbs. So mainly descriptive terms, that's what these are used for. So for example, the diver made a well jump off the platform. Okay, so we're using an adjective here, and it doesn't make sense because well, right? Well jump, that doesn't make sense. So it'd be like good jump. The diver made a good jump off the platform. An example, another example, the man is driving so wild down the street. It'd be wildly since you're comparing it to the driving because it's an adverb this time, you're comparing it to the verb. So these ones are a little bit tricky, especially if you're not the best with figuring out the difference between adjectives and adverbs. But just look at what the adjective or adverb is trying to modify. Good, right? Going back to the diver. Wildly, it's going back to driving. So just think of it like that. All right, comparatives and superlatives. So comparative words, they're comparing two things to each other. You're using words that end in er. Superlative words, they're three things to each other. You're using words that end in est, est. So, example, she is better than all the members on the soccer team. Typically, superlatives, you're doing three or more, by the way. But all the members, that's more than three, so we're using a superlative. So instead of better, is the best out of, in this case. Another example, between you and me, I'm the best at ping pong. You're explicitly saying you and me. So it's two people. We're using a comparative word here. So instead of the best, we're saying I am better at ping pong. So these ones are pretty simple. Just know whether you're doing comparison to three or more versus two. All right, commonly confused words. You have accept versus accept. So like accept is like you're receiving something. Accept is like not including, right? It's an exception. Effect versus effect. Effect is you're directly causing something. Effect is what is the result of the cause. Between versus among. So between is like comparing two things. Among, you're comparing many different things. Have versus of. Have, like I have something, that's a verb. Of is more of a preposition. So like you're not using it as a verb like you would with have. Less and much versus fewer and many. So you're wanting to use less and much when you're comparing numbers. Fewer and many is when you're not doing numbers. Lie versus lay. So lie, like I'm lying down. Lay, I'm laying on my pillow. These are a little interchangeable, but just think about what is the correct word to substitute in the context of the sentence that you're reading. Then we have neither nor versus either or. So these are always sticking together. Neither nor is when one of the options is not correct. Either or, either option. Both options could be correct. Than versus then. Than versus then. So then is like kind of connecting versus than, which is more numerical based. There versus there. Okay. There versus there versus there. So there, that's like a location. There is like possession. And then there is they are. So that's possession. I'm sorry, not possession. They are is, that is possession. Okay, two versus two. So two, like I go to the place. Again, that's location. Two, I had too many burgers. That's having like an excess amount. And then two obviously is two different things. And then finally we have who versus which versus that. So who is the subject, which is what's happening, and then that is a specific thing. So these can be a little confusing at times, but you want to be able to kind of substitute these into sentences and see whether it makes the most sense. I'm kind of repeating that a lot throughout this video because that's honestly one of the biggest tips you can have on this section. Does it make sense in the context, and does it sound correct when you sound it out? So here's an example passage. I'm not going to go through it due to the sake of time, but you can pause the video and kind of use the strategies and the grammar review that we just went over to answer these questions. Make sure as you're going through these specific questions, you are looking at context and seeing if it makes sense. Remember, we're trying to follow the correct, we're trying to follow the grammar rules that we just talked about. So I'm going to pause here for a second and pause the video, work through these questions. Remember, you see these paragraphs being numbered. These are the big picture questions that I was talking about. So make sure you're trying to see the flow of these paragraphs. Do they make sense in terms of where they are? Because it specifically tells you here, each paragraph is numbered in brackets. Question 14 will ask you to choose where paragraph 3 should be most logically placed. So see if paragraph 3, where doesn't make sense, or should it come before and after, or after another different paragraph. All right, so I'll pause here for a second. All right, and then here are the other questions to finish it off. I will again pause for just a second for you guys to work through it. All right, and then here are the answers if you want to see how you did. All right, so ending it off, we're just going to go over some tips really quick that I have for this section. Number 1, hear it out in your head and trust your ear. This is the biggest tip possible, but there is a caveat to this. It still needs to make sense grammatically wise. If everything was just trust your ear, we wouldn't even need to waste time going over grammar. But we are, because grammar is the biggest thing on this test. So hearing it out in your head and trusting your ear is going to help you in terms of narrowing down answer choices. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that it grammatically still makes sense. Think about the context and flow of the passage when you're answering questions, right? Kind of ties in, like, for example, for transitions. Doesn't make sense, I'm putting a particular transition here. Doesn't make sense compared to what comes before and after, for example. Think about flow when you're looking at different questions. The passage still needs to make sense. That's why they're having you edit them. Pace yourself well. Some questions you'll be able to answer really quickly, and others, like the big picture questions, it might take you some time. But ideally, you want to spend around 9 minutes per passage. Again, it's not a set in stone number. It's just if you do 45 minutes divided by 5 passages, you get 9 minutes per passage. Some passages you finish pretty quickly. Others will take you some time. That's okay, but you need to make sure you're pacing yourself well. One of the things I like to do for this section is kind of check at the halfway point, where am I? If I'm not done with at least 37, 38 questions by the halfway point, I'm going too slow. I need to start picking it up a little bit. If I'm going way over, like in terms of let's say I'm done with 50 questions by the time I'm at the halfway point, that's okay. If you're actually, working through each question and it's just coming to you quickly, that's also okay. Again, it's good to leave a tiny bit of time for you to check answers if you can, but not too much time. Again, we don't want to have you start second guessing yourself. That's definitely a no-no. Also, another important one, you can pick no change if needed. If the sentence still makes sense, or if the paragraph is in the correct part of the passage, and it makes sense grammatically wise and it makes sense flow wise, pick no change. Not every single question on the ACT requires you to change. So if it makes sense and it's grammatically correct, you can pick no change and move on. And then another important thing, synonymous answers will not be correct. So basically, if you're having answers that are kind of accomplishing the same purpose, they're wrong, because you can't have 2 correct answers on the ACT English exam. So there's a better answer that you need to find. Sometimes it's about finding the least wrong answer more than finding the answer that you think is right. All right, so that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope these videos overall are helping you get a lot of tips on the ACT section, different ACT sections. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to let me know. See you all, and I will see you guys